Hey, I'm Stephen Henderson of American Black Journal and One Detroit. I'm really pleased to share with you this exclusive in-depth interview with DPSCD Superintendent Dr. Nikolai Vitti. This One Detroit Town Hall comes in conjunction with the release of the DPSCD documentary, We Went to Work, Courage Through COVID, which details the district's efforts to help students and their families get through the pandemic. If you're interested in watching the full documentary, you can log on to detroitk12.org/we went to work. And now we hope you enjoy this conversation with DPSCD Superintendent Dr. Nikolai Vitti.
Before the pandemic, Detroit Public Schools were making progress in addressing the issues the district faced while simultaneously charting a better path forward. Then,
schools closed.
Oh my God. I had some anxiety. I was scared.
I was shook.
I was.
It was scary.
Just to think of how that would affect our city.
The city communities were ravaged.
Food was needed out there.
Employees passing,
My fears were that my family was gonna get it.
children's parents passing.
People were getting desperate.
Hurt, sad, depressed.
I don't care who you are.
It was catastrophic, to be honest.
We have been shook by COVID.
How do you continue educating children when they're home? You know, the rest of the nation then is using laptops, computers, internet for teachers to connect with students, and we know that we have a digital divide.
That piece was critical, and I will say that our superintendent was very intentional in saying that we're not going to piecemeal this, that we got to make sure every child has a device to work on and to be engaged from an equity lens, right?
now, as we emerge from the pandemic, what does the future of the Detroit Public School District and Michigan education look like?
So now what we want people to understand is when we have the resources, there's nothing we can't and won't do.
You know, nothing is off the tables.
And that's why this is so important.
When we think about everything that happens on a porch, conversations, stories passed on generation from generation.
If we don't tell our story, people will create a story for us.
You know, as we're sitting here, I'm thinking about that home visit process.
It's been done so many times, especially when you're talking about public education.
And the district went above and beyond and met families where they were, which was back on that porch to have a conversation about how are you? How's your child? What do you need? What can we do?
Hi, I'm Stephen Henderson, and thanks for joining this One Detroit Town Hall. Today we are talking about education, where we need to go and how we get there. And I am joined by Detroit Public Schools Superintendent Dr. Nikolai Vitti. Dr. Vitti, welcome to One Detroit.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to be with you in person again.
Yeah, I know. We haven't seen each other in like 3 years, like everybody, right? So I want to start here. You are back full-time, in person, every school, every child. It's been a long time since we were there, and a lot has changed. We lost a lot of ground during that time. Talk about the opening of school this year, the challenges ahead, and how you're facing them.
Yeah, well, you know, last year, all of our children were back in person. All schools were open, with the exception of about 3,000, 2,000 that were in the virtual school. But a lot of stop and goes last year. You know, surges, infection rates high, close contacting, quarantine. So although we were back last year, it just didn't feel normal.
Yeah.
We were managing COVID. I would say 80% of my job, and probably teachers, principals, just heavy on COVID. This year when we opened, you know, we've been open now for about over 20 days, it just feels a lot better. It feels more normal. We're still dealing with the challenges or lingering challenges of the pandemic, but it feels better. It feels more normal, and I think that there's an energy, a positive energy of just now seeing some momentum and a clear pathway forward to just get back to the student achievement work.
Yeah. We lost ground here in Detroit. Well, that doesn't make us unique, because most school districts had a hard time with it. But things visit on our kids, our families, our community really differently than other places. Talk about some of the things that happened that really you have to focus on and maybe have your concerns still
Yeah.
As we go forward?
Well, when you look at just running the district and what are the challenges that we're facing. So one, enrollment. So we lost about 3,000 students when you look at where we were when the pandemic hit. March 2020, we are at the highest level of our enrollment. First time we saw an increase in 2 decades at about 51,000. We just turned the corner on count. It looks like we are now down maybe 2,000 to 1,500 compared to our peak before the pandemic. So enrollment. Other issue is just disrupting the normal flow of attendance. Just last year, I'm over with online learning, devices, parents feeling comfortable, young children not going to school, not being comfortable online. A lot of disruption to coming to school on a day-to-day basis. So last year, even though we were in person, 80% of our students missed 18 or more days. Wow. And so just sort of the regularity of coming to school every day was highly disrupted. The surges, online learning, but also just close contact and quarantine. Students that weren't vaccinated had to quarantine for 14 days, even if they weren't sick. Right. And then that got dropped to 10, and then all that negatively impacts student achievement. And that's happening nationally. It's not unique to DPSCD. We're seeing lower levels of at and above grade level performance. On the positive side, when you look at last year's state testing, DPSCD showed less learning loss than the entire state of Michigan, and when you look at city charter schools. So, we continue to work. We used our curriculum, shifted online, kept the schedule the same. So we dropped, but we didn't drop at the same level as the rest of Michigan did, and the rest of, for example, comparison, city charter schools did.
Yeah. So the attendance problem and the population problem, it's something we have dealt with for some time. Of course, in Detroit, it's not new because of the pandemic, but it may be more acute because of the pandemic. And then, of course, there's more pressure on you, on everyone who works in the schools to fix it. At the same time, it's not something you really have a ton of control over. So I want to give you a chance to talk just a little bit about what you, as the superintendent, can even do to make sure kids are coming to school and make sure that you're holding the population that you have.
Well, during the pandemic, I think what DPSCD, and we were nationally recognized for this, was our home visit process. So literally taking central office staff, school level staff, and even some volunteers to go door to door and say schools are open. Or when we were online, we have a laptop for you, internet access. And that has continued to be very effective. The traditional robocalls, even some of the media pieces, doesn't always trickle down to a lot of our parents. Yeah. So that face-to-face contact has been important, was important throughout the pandemic and even now. The other thing, just talking more about the importance of daily attendance. So through data. So not trying to overwhelm people with data, but what was really true last year, true in the past, but especially last year, was if a student was only absent less than, let's say, 8 days, they were about 4 or 5 times more likely to be at and above grade level in literacy and math. So we're trying to have that conversation more with families at the school level to just break down that data to say coming to school matters and it's directly related to student achievement. We're also just trying to message and fight the notion that it's okay to occasionally miss some days. Now, 1 or 2 days throughout the year, no big deal. But there's still the idea that, well, I'm at school 4 days a week, not 5, and that's okay. Yeah. When you deal with some of the life challenges that our families deal with, that makes sense. But then again, we need that child there every day. So I think the responsibility of the district at this point is just to continue the messaging, the encouragement, and the problem solving. And I think that's also the last piece that we're starting to get better at scale, which are giving resources to families to overcome some of the root causes of chronic absenteeism. For example, help with eviction, funds to pay the power bill. And some of that leads to less disruption from home to home moving, which then doesn't lead the child to have to drive longer distance, get on a different bus, or even have to transfer to a different school. Yeah.
Let's talk about student learning and the changes that you were making before the pandemic and where you pick up with them now. You had some momentum, really, with test scores and things like that. How do you get it back?
Yeah, you get it back by going back to what we were doing. So you're right. Last time our students tested before last year was 18-19.
Right.
And in 18-19, DPSCD showed more improvement in and grade level performance than the entire state of Michigan. In every grade level in literacy and math. And then the pandemic hit, and everything just slowed. And then we had to rethink systems and processes, moving curriculum online, getting out laptops, teaching online, getting kids to log in, staying engaged, all of that. So, the positive is because we kept the curriculum going and we kept the schedule the same, meaning some schools went to like only 3 hours of online learning. We kept the full day, which is a challenge, but I think it was important to try to create as much consistency as possible. With that consistency, we showed less loss than the state of Michigan and Detroit charter schools. Now we got to keep our kids in school. And that's going to be the focal point of this year is we have to have kids come to school every day, consistently. Even when we're dealing with issues of COVID, we got to keep schools open. And I think if we're going to do that, we're going to see a bounce in student achievement this year. I'm optimistic that we can at least rebound to where we were before the pandemic hit. And then I think this year will be a year where we'll see once again more improvement in at and above grade level performance than the state and comparatively the local charter schools.
Yeah. So remind me, how long have you been in the job now?
So this is my 6th school year.
This is your 6th year, okay.
Yeah.
I remember when you came, one of the first conversations we had, we talked about charter schools, how you feel about charter schools. I want to give you a chance to talk just a little about the challenge you think that structure, the fact that we have such a large charter school system in the city and the public schools, what challenge that presents to sustaining public education the way we need to in Detroit.
Well, I think so oftentimes people like to draw me into the sort of the charter school debate.
You threw yourself in
I
there.
I did fair.
With what you
I
said.
don't know if it was it was a trap that I fell in or what, but at the end, for me, it was important to be passionate about the work that we do.
Yeah.
And I think when I was privileged to become superintendent, leaders before me, at least before Alicia Merriweather, they were political appointments. They weren't educators. They didn't have a vision for the district. They didn't have energy around what traditional public education could be about. So for me, it was about showing that we would be competitive again and embrace the competition. I think, since those conversations, 5-6 years ago, what I see now is that there are families that clearly feel more comfortable in charter schools. And that's not going to change. And I never was anti-choice. I always felt there should be choice. I still do. I think that the challenge is how do we create choice with guardrails? And how do we create accountability for all schools in the city? I know, for example, we have a single letter grade system that we use for our schools. So we give a single letter grade based on enrollment, attendance, chronic absenteeism, at and above grade level performance, growth. We look at surveying of students, of families, and even staff, and all that comes together for a grade. When that grade, and that was put on hold during the pandemic, but now that we're back, those letter grades are issued. And if we're going to continue to see lower letter grades, we got to change a principal, we got to change a faculty, or we got to think differently about that school. Where is that accountability throughout the city? And I think, I know I and the board is holding us accountable to higher performance. What does that look like in these other charter schools where there isn't that public conversation about performance? The state's accountability system is all over the place, is really incoherent. So that's what worries me, is that the grass may seem greener on the other side, but from a performance point of view, how do we continue to hold all schools accountable in the city to higher levels of performance?
Well, and there's not been a whole lot of interest at the state level to do that. But you use the word competition, and you've used that word many times and said, look, you're not shying from the competition with other schools, charter or private or whatever. So make the case. Make the case to me about, hey, why should you have my children rather than a charter school or a private school in Detroit?
Well, and one, I'll say that there are good city charter schools. There are some that compete with our choice schools, our exam schools and application schools. But I would say for the, when you're looking at the landscape of Detroit and the options there, I think what's different about DPSCD is one, we have at and above grade level curriculum. We have very clear data systems that tell us where children are at and how they're doing. I also think we have better wraparound services around mental health, around guidance counselors and social workers, now expanding after school programming. But I think that there's also, lastly, it goes back to my more accountability. You have an elected board, 7 individuals that have to go out in the community to a church, sororities, fraternities, just everyday homes, alumni, that they're accountable to. And obviously they have appointed me and empowered me to run the district. I don't think that charter schools can say that. Charter schools, many of their boards, they're not Detroiters, some are. I don't think they have that neighborhood accountability presence. When you look at performance over time in certain ones, not all of them, I'm just wondering, what are they doing differently to improve achievement, or is it just a matter of enrollment? And at the end of the day, there's a legacy linked to DPSCD that other charter schools don't have and will never have. Detroit, DPSCD, DPS before it, has created legends in the political space, the athletic space, the musical space, just leadership in general. And that legacy we're continuing to build on and I think strengthen. And with that legacy, I just think comes more accountability. And lastly, sustainability. I wonder whether some of these charter schools are more flashes in the pan about just quickly getting into the market, but how long will they stay there? When the principal leaves, when the CEO leaves, will they actually be a permanent part of the community long term? Or is it more of a quick fix, a quick opportunity, rather than permanency and consistency and sustainability? That's what makes traditional public schools different.
Speaking of traditional schools and innovation and things like that, we're sitting here at Marygrove, where for the last 4 years now, you guys have had a school that looks really different from some of the others that you might enroll your kids in. Talk about what's going on here and the fact that you're about to graduate the first class from this high school.
So this is really one of a kind opportunity. When Kresge first came to me, in fact, we just had a panel discussion and Wendy Jackson came to me and started to talk about the opportunity. What do you think? She'll tell you, I politely cut her off and I said, we're in. Because I knew that there were private schools and charter schools that would chomp at the bit at this opportunity. And coming in as superintendent, I knew this was an opportunity for DPSCD to get it right and to show that we could take something this big at this scale, this complication, with a lot of funders, nonprofit organizations, and University of Michigan, and show everyone that our past is different to where we are now. We can problem solve, we can be strategic, cut through red tape, cut through the bureaucracy, and get things done. And I think we've been able to show that. So this partnership is going to be an early year program to 12th grade. So we have babies already on campus. It'll go all the way to 12th grade. It is a neighborhood-based school, so we want neighborhood children to come here. So there's a zone of 2 miles and 1 mile radius that if you apply, you get preference. And if you get into the early learning program, you have guaranteed amendments later. But it's also in partnership with the University of Michigan, it's also about developing future teachers. So we have residents here, undergraduate students, graduate students that are learning how to teach through our teachers. So we're also building a pipeline of teachers, not only for here, but throughout DPSCD. There'll be a health hub here with mental health support, dental, medical, for not only for the students, faculty, and staff, but the greater community. So I think this is not only a one-of-a-kind initiative, but scalable in many different ways. The teaching part, the health hub component, and lastly, it's about revitalizing the community. And that goes back to what makes traditional public schools different. They're neighborhood-based, and I think I've said this, I'm proud of the new buildings we have, the new stadiums we have in the city, but we're not going to transform the city unless we transform education. And I think that can only happen at scale through traditional public education. You're going to always have good charter schools here and there, but that's not scale. Right. And we can't talk about transformation and new generational opportunities if we're not talking about strengthening traditional public education.
So how do you take something like this then and scale it?
Yeah.
Do you create other examples of this across the state, or do you take what you're doing here and install it in existing schools?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
You know, some of the work that we're doing with Michigan about professional development, more project-based learning, especially at the secondary level. A lot of the continuity and partnership among teachers on grade levels, that's scalable throughout the district. The teacher pipeline, obviously. The health hub is something that we want to build out in all the neighborhood schools throughout the district to overcome some of the obstacles that get in the way of consistent attendance. But I think that there's also an opportunity here on the facility part. So, you know, very old building, obviously, and private money to upgrade it. But I think long term, there's an opportunity in some of our older buildings, if we get it right here, to show private sponsors and donors on how some older buildings could be transformed, preserved, and sustained with private investment.
Yeah. I want to talk about the $700 million that is coming in through ARPA to help with infrastructure in the schools principally. I've covered schools for a long time in the city. I don't know that we've had many bond issues that have brought us more money at one time to do that. So talk about what you want to do and why it will matter to kids every day.
Well, I think the biggest impact for children and staff will be air conditioning. You know, right now only about 20% of our schools have air conditioning, and people will say, oh, well, I went to school, we didn't have air conditioning. Well, it's, you know, 2022, and air conditioning is sort of part of our life. Right. And when you get into June and even, you know, certain months in August, or days in August and September, it can be hot. We have to close schools or go half days, and it gets uncomfortable when it gets warm. So that's a significant. But you know, going back to neighborhood schools, investing in a brand new Pershing building, brand new Cody, building a new building in Southwest Detroit with probably an arts focus to feed into Detroit School of the Arts. So on a day-to-day basis, just buildings that are not going to disrupt learning around just better HVAC systems, better roofs, and sort of mundane day-to-day things that can be highly disruptive to learning. But beyond that, innovative in some new school buildings, especially to preserve some neighborhood schools. Yeah,
that idea of building schools, renovating schools, retrofitting schools, it fits though in a bigger context of the mismatch, I think, still with where schools are, what their capacity is, and where kids are. I mean, we're still kind of operating a system that is like a suit that's too big, and you can't cut you can't cut a sleeve off. You've got to make it actually. You got to tailor it.
Yeah, and part of the we called it the facility master planning that didn't happen in generations. You know, coming in to an organization this size, the district had no master plan on how to even use the buildings and upgrade. So we did that through outside audits and reviews. But part of deciding where to invest the $700 million came through almost 2 months of community engagement. And part of the conversation was, we don't want to just take from the community, as was done during emergency management, but can we take and give something back in return that's better? So part of the plan, obviously the HVAC system and the new buildings got most of the attention, but part of the plan also is to phase out, I believe 6 to 7 schools. And that goes back to trying to right size the district. So not closing, because what we didn't want to do is just take children out of one building and put them somewhere else, because I think that just replicates sort of the sins of the past, but instead phasing them out. So not adding a kindergarten or first grade, and then as the kids get older, you're just phasing out lower grades. And if parents just opt out to go to a nearby school, then so be it. But part of this work is also right-fitting the district to population, and adding schools in higher level populations or growing populations like Southwest Detroit. And that's why we're building a new K-8 there. So doing the hard, difficult work and making hard decisions, but doing it in a way that's sensitive to the community, and not just moving kids from one school to the other.
Yeah, I was going to say that's hard to do even when there is a good reason.
Yeah.
You talk to someone in the neighborhood, they've had that school there for 50, 60, 70 years in some cases. They don't want to lose it.
It was a hard decision, but I think the broader community understood that those hard decisions had to be made. But how can we do it and still protect children's education and not disrupt it? And I think that was the balance that we found. And the schools that will be phased out will be demolished.
Yeah.
So we're not also going to increase the number of vacant buildings or vacant school buildings throughout the city as well, because part of that $700 million is earmarked to demolish those buildings. So we'll be left with only a couple of schools that we own in DPSCD that are buildings that are vacant.
Huh. I want to talk just a little about the future, right? Things are getting back to normal. What are your expectations, or what would you tell a parent their expectations should be for how quickly we recover from everything that's happened over the last 3 years?
Well, I think that there'll be long-lasting negative impacts of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm dealing with it. It was not easy managing the district during the pandemic.
Sure.
And that affected our teachers, our principals, our parents who lost loved ones, our children. So there is no magic wand to say, we have to live with that history. But I am confident, and I would tell any parent this, is that by the end of this academic year, if you send your child to school consistently, we're going to not only show a years of growth, but probably 2 years of growth, and be even closer to being at and above grade level performers.
Yeah.
I know it's not a matter of I wish, I hope. In 1819, we did it. We moved the needle academically.
Right.
And I know we can, it's not about doing things radically different. It's just going back to the work that we were doing. And I think adding and filling some gaps that we had around mental health and some broader holistic approaches to supporting families, which I think we're doing a lot better as a district. So the average parent needs to know that at the end of this year, we're going to see improvement in student achievement. We just need parents to do their part by sending their children to school on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Okay, we've got some questions from folks who are watching the town hall. Appreciate that. Marva on Facebook says, what's the goal for more parental involvement in schools?
Well, this is not part of the work that you ever get to.
Yeah,
that you
right.
never say
done.
we're done.
Right.
Yeah, it's almost like communication. You can always refine and improve communication. So I feel that we've done a lot of the right things over the last year. So reestablishing PTAs in all schools. We have a parent academy that offers classes on financial literacy to supporting literacy in the home, to filling out applications, to FAFSAs, to just managing anger and building better relationships with students. And that has engaged now probably 10,000 parents over the last 60 years. In addition to that, it's putting a parent liaison at every school, an actual parent, so that they can better connect with other parents about coming to school every day, enrolling your students. We have school advisory councils that we have now where parents sit on. But ultimately, I think it's just constantly reinforcing and challenging some accepted behaviors around attendance is the main issue.
Yeah.
We just have to continue to do the outreach and the communication and just build better awareness that every day of school matters, and the more that you're in school, the better you're going to do from a student achievement point of view.
Kind of related question, what about teachers? The relationship between teachers in the district, it was pretty tense at times during the pandemic. A lot of teachers felt like there was a rush back to in-person and that people weren't being adequately kept safe. Where are you with that now?
Yeah, that was, in my tenure, that was probably the height of renewed tension.
Yeah.
That was coming back from the peak of the pandemic, so that would have been the 2020, 2021 school year.
Mm-hmm.
And my position was that it was about equity, that if private schools were going to be open and suburban school districts were going to be open, then DPSCD schools were going to be open, and empower the parent to make that decision, and then let's work with the teachers that were willing to come, and hopefully we could be at about the right level and then open schools. Obviously, a lot of compromises went and took place, so that schools did open, but all teachers had choice, and that led to probably more parents keeping their children at home than they wanted, but we lived to see another day, meaning we survived the pandemic, and I think the relationship with teachers is not only much better, obviously, versus emergency management, but it's really straightened over the years. Our teachers are making about $15,000 more than they were 6 years ago. Our beginning teachers are at almost $52,000, which is much higher than other Metro Detroit school districts. Right now, as of today, as I sit here, we only have 10 teacher vacancies and only 2 special ed teacher vacancies when you look at our allocations versus students. So we're nearly fully staffed on the teacher side. We're not seeing schools, when I started, we'd have school with 10 teacher vacancies. Today, we only have 1 school with 2. All the other ones have 1. So, you can talk a lot about relationships being better, but at the end of the day, that's in the numbers. We wouldn't be able to retain and recruit the teachers that we have if they didn't want to work in our district. Is there work that needs to be done? Absolutely. I mean, we still have work around retention, around teacher voice, around the curriculum and improving in professional development, but every district works through that. But I think some of our greatest challenges have been overcome, and I'm looking forward to the day when our most veteran teachers are the highest paid in the country. I think the work in Detroit is the hardest, and our teachers should be making $90,000 to $100,000 a year.
And we've made a little progress there, is that right? But not
where, no, I think our beginning teachers now are highly competitive in their salary because about 3/4 of our teachers are on the top step. Right now they're at about 82,000, which when I started, they were only at about 68,000. So we've made huge improvements, but they need to be at about 90 to 100. Now that's a lot of money in the budget. I can't do that overnight, but we're constantly trying to work towards to get that, and also maximizing one-time money to add to the reoccurring salary.
Yeah. We got another question from, I think, Sharon on Facebook. Says, how does the board and you as a superintendent, how do you justify supporting a separate and unequal educational landscape within the system aside from the problem with charters? I assume they're talking about the choice schools.
Yeah, we hear that, and I think to some level it's a fair criticism, but at the same time, when you look at our exam schools, so when we say exam, we're talking about Marygrove, we're talking about CAS, we're talking about Renaissance, and in application schools like Bates and Flicks. It would not be in any way strategic to rid the school system of those schools. We just would not attract our highest performing students and more of our middle class families.
People would leave in more numbers than they already are.
And if I were a charter school, the first thing I would do is replicate CAS and then open up a CAS. So I do believe, though, we can be more, we're certainly more equal than we ever were, even within the system, on how we fund schools and how we, for example, make sure every school has an assistant principal or a counselor and music and art. But there's still work to be done, especially at high schools, in being more equitable, meaning giving more to those schools that need more.
That need it,
But there's also a state responsibility in that. And Governor Whitmer has really done a good job of increasing funding for education, more funding for special needs children. The legislature has come along, but we still are toward the bottom in per pupil funding in the country, and we're still inequitable when you look at local funding bases in Southfield, Birmingham, where because of the need to tax locally to get state aid, they keep the money beyond the minimum, which then allows them to pay teachers more, put more money in facilities, and they don't have the day-to-day challenges that our students bring compared to theirs.
Yeah. Aaliyah on Facebook has a related question. Where are you going to get the money for academic recovery? You're getting the $700 million for facilities that can't be spent on schooling and schooling materials and things like that. Do you need more money, and where are you going to get it?
Yeah, so for the last 2 years, we've used COVID relief funding, ARPA funding, for after-school programming. We expanded summer school programming. Last year, we dramatically lowered class sizes to do social distancing. We hired extra teachers to anticipate that hiring teachers would be harder after the pandemic. We've increased more literacy support, one-on-one, small group, but that money goes away at the end of this year.
Yeah.
So it'll be hard to sustain even some of the things that we did. We are going to just completely revisit the budget going into 22-23 because we don't have COVID relief funding, and we have to deal with the fact that we have inflation. You know, the district is dealing with inflation like everyone else.
Yeah.
So we have inflation. We have about 1,000 to 1,500 student loss in enrollment before the pandemic. And not only inflation, but we have to continue to be competitive with teacher salaries because the market right now is favoring teachers to go where the money is highest. And it's always been that way, but it's even more competitive now because the suburban school districts are challenged with staffing. So this all means that the VUE dollars that we have are going to be stretched even more because of inflation, enrollment, and the need to be more competitive with salaries. So there's a way to get there, but we're going to have to do things dramatically different to get there.
What things would have to maybe go?
Yeah, so we're looking at some of the extra positions we have at school. So, you know, do we need a dean at every school? Do we need a school culture facilitator at every school? Do we concentrate our attendance agents more in the neighborhood schools with the highest levels of chronic absenteeism? Those are the questions that we're asking right now.
Those are tough things to lose.
Well, we need them all.
They would have a consequence.
Yeah, but if we keep everything the same, we're not going to be able to invest strategically in the things that we have to invest more in.
Yeah. Okay.
I wish I had the dollars, but we have to function off of what we have.
That's really a state function and a state conversation. Yeah. Well, it was great to have you here.
You too. Thank you.
That's going to do it for us on this One Detroit Town Hall. I want to thank you for joining us. For more One Detroit coverage and future of work town halls, you can visit onedetroitpbs.org. We'll see you next time.